yeah, I'm going to talk about what veganism is and the theory behind it and how we should frame it to others. So my opinions are my own. These aren't the opinions of We the Free necessarily, although I'm an organizer with them. And these ideas are not completely original. They're influenced by lots of different sources. And at the end of the talk, I'll have a slide with some further reading. So yeah, let's get started. So theory is about how do we understand an issue? How do we understand the causes of it and what aspects of it are important and which ones are auxiliary? And framing is about how we present those ideas to other people. So our framing obviously follows from what our theory is, because our theory is our own understanding and our framing is when we're trying to convince other people, right? So those two need to be in alignment. And I think it's really important that we analyze the different theories that people have about why animal exploitation is happening, what veganism is. We really need to be clear on this in order to frame the issue correctly. Animal exploitation. So animal exploitation is an aspect of all societies around the world historically for thousands of years, right? Once exploitation becomes a core part of a society, a core part of its economy, a core part of its culture, then speciesism develops, which is an ideology which justifies these practices. So speciesism can take many forms, such as incorrect beliefs about animals, which might be pseudoscientific beliefs, they might be religious beliefs, so beliefs like that animals don't feel pain or that they don't have souls, things like that. And once these speciesist understandings take root, it further reinforces that exploitation. So it's a vicious cycle. So veganism, what is veganism? Veganism is about rejecting animal exploitation and rejecting speciesism. So a vegan is someone who's opposing this, and that means that they don't participate in this violence in their own lives, but also that they're broadly opposed to it. So it's a political position to say that we want to abolish this exploitation. It's not just an individual choice to not partake in it. And veganism is trying to address that exploitation and that speciesism at the same time. So now I'm going to talk about some errors, I think, that are common in the movement with regards to how veganism is presented. So the first one is the idea that veganism is about kindness. So slogans like be kind, be vegan, for example. This is not the best way to frame veganism because it's not really about kindness, right? It's about not participating in an injustice against the animals. And it can come across as arrogant as well. Not all vegans are kind people, right? I know a lot of you in this room. Not every vegan's perfect, right? We don't want veganism to seem like a special thing that really good people do, because really it's just the minimum that we should expect from all of us. And relatedly, veganism is not about a generic opposition to violence. Veganism is not synonymous with non-violence. It just means that we don't want to participate in this unjustifiable violence that's being done to animals. And slogans like veganism is about love or kindness or non-violence, they get turned against vegans when vegans use aggressive tactics, or they make you feel uncomfortable, they say controversial things, or they're mean. Non-vegans are like, oh, I thought you were about peace and love and kindness, what's going on, right? They see a contradiction. And the reason they see a contradiction is because our messaging had a flaw in it in the first place. Similarly, veganism is not about reducing suffering, or it's not about some really broad general goal. It's not an overarching philosophy. It's just a specific movement to try to abolish this one injustice, which is the animal exploitation that's happening all around the world. We don't want to tie ourselves to some really grand narrative, right? Because different vegans have different philosophical beliefs, they have different views about ethics and meta-ethics. That's not what veganism is about at its core. Systemic change. I don't know if you're seeing this, but I see people saying that we should focus on systemic change to try and stop animal exploitation, and they reject the idea that individual change is meaningful or that it's something that we should promote. And they reject styles of activism which do individual outreach, like We the Free and AV. And The core reason I think that's a huge mistake is because who is going to actually make any systemic change happen if they're not vegan? Like what I was saying originally about how there's a relationship between that exploitation and that speciesism, that doesn't just apply at the broad social level, that applies within an individual as well. As long as someone's still participating in the system of violence against animals, they're not going to view those animals, they're not going to value their lives correctly. And there's psychological studies that prove this is the case, right? So who's going to actually achieve that change if not vegans? Of course we need more vegans. And of course I'm not opposed to systemic change, it's something we should fight for. But I also see there's this idea that's become popularized that we just need to hit some magic threshold amount of vegans in the population and that this will solve our problems. I hear different numbers, sometimes it's 15%. I think this idea came from Extinction Rebellion or somewhere. They were talking about the environment, they weren't talking about animal exploitation. But there's loads of movements that have achieved 15% support and failed, right? We have to prepare for success and we have to always be looking forward to what our next steps are, but we can't be complacent. We can't think that we'll hit some threshold and that this will solve itself, because it won't. And also I'd like to talk about capitalism. Some people think that capitalism is the root cause of animal exploitation, but animal exploitation has been happening for thousands and thousands of years, way before capitalism existed. And in the countries which are non-capitalist in modern times, they also exploit animals just as severely as we do in capitalist countries. So it's not necessary or sufficient for us to abolish capitalism in order to address animal exploitation. If we had a more democratic system to control how production operates, then maybe we wouldn't be so heavily propagandized, and so maybe animal consumption might fall somewhat because corporate influence is certainly inflating that consumption. But as long as the bulk of people in society think it's completely okay to victimize these animals for these products, it's going to keep happening, right? Okay, speciesism. So if someone thinks it's okay to eat cows, but it's not okay to eat dogs, are they speciesist? Put your hand up if you think they're speciesist. Yeah, most people. So if someone thinks it's okay to eat cows and it's okay to eat dogs because they enjoy it, is that person speciesist? Put your hands up if you think they are. Okay, and what if someone says, I know it's wrong, like it's bad what we do to animals, like we shouldn't kill and use them, we shouldn't eat them, but like it's just difficult for me to go vegan and I can't really be bothered. Is that person speciesist? What do you think? Yeah, so apathy is really prevalent in our society, right? And apathy is a symptom of speciesism. Because if the things that we're doing to these animals were happening to human animals, people wouldn't be so apathetic about it, right? So the core of speciesism is not about, oh, you think dogs are like this, but you think cows are like this. The core of speciesism is human supremacy. So when we're trying to explain speciesism to people, we shouldn't use dog examples. And another issue with dog examples is these dogs are exploited as well. And a lot of times if you do ask people, oh, why do you think it's okay to eat cows but not dogs? A common answer is, oh, dogs can provide me love. So that's framed in terms of a use, right? It's like, oh, these dogs are more valuable to me alive than dead. But it's not about their intrinsic value. It's about, oh, they make me feel good or something like that, right? So we got to address human supremacy when we're talking about speciesism. Another thing is carnism. This is an idea that Melanie Joy came up with. And it's a similar concept to speciesism, but carnism really frames things around meat. The word carnism comes from the word meat. And that's not the issue, because we can see in historically vegetarian societies, like certain places in India, animal exploitation is still key to their culture and historically their system of production, right? They would have used animal slave labor for tilling crops and such, and they consumed dairy. And the form of speciesism they have there will be different to a form of speciesism you'll find in a place which consumes animal bodies. But really, this can be explained by the same overarching concept, which is the commodification of these animals for economic use. So carnism is not as doesn't have the same explanatory power as speciesism as an idea. And the other problem with it, as Melanie Joy describes it, is she calls it an invisible belief system. But speciesism is very visible. If you do activism on the street, you'll hear people say the most horrific things about animals, right? They openly devalue their lives, say that they're worthless, say, oh, my taste preference is more important. And there's also people who aren't like that, but who are aware of their own speciesism. People who can realize that what we're doing to animals is somewhat wrong, but they haven't changed their habits, and they are aware of that. So that belief system is not invisible to them. They're somewhat conscious of it. So let's not let non-vegans off the hook by saying that they're in an invisible soup, right? That's kind of infantilizing as well, isn't it? And I'd like to talk about intersectionality. So the theory of intersectionality was developed by Black feminists to explain how racism and sexism overlap in a way that produces a unique experience for Black women who are subject to both of these types of oppression. And animal rights activists also often use this to talk about veganism, but I think this is an error because non-human animals are solely subject to speciesism. Now, you might disagree and say, are animals not subject to sexism as well? I would say no. So animals are exploited differentially based on their sex characteristics, but this isn't to do with patriarchy or a sexist ideology. It's just to do with what's most profitable and what's most efficient at producing these economic goods that people want out of these animals. And to explain that point, imagine if human beings didn't have sexual dimorphism. Imagine if there were no male and female human beings, if we were all just hermaphrodites. Do you think that what we'd be doing to animals would be any different, or would we be doing the exact same things to them, right? One issue with intersectionality is sometimes the arguments used by intersectional vegans, such as Carol J. Adams has this book, The Sexual Politics of Meat. She draws a link between sexism and the consumption of animals. But the argument ends up being, well, we shouldn't use and kill animals because that might lead to people committing violence against women. But then it ends up always being that we shouldn't do bad things to animals because it'll lead to humans being victimized. It's not that we're being active because these animals themselves need us. And a lot of these ideas which link together different forms of oppression, I worry if someone says, oh, no, actually, it's perfectly possible to have a society that's free of misogyny but still victimizes animals. If that's true, then these arguments don't have any power. And then what's the argument for not using and killing animals anymore? And I'd also like to say that animal rights activists, I don't think they have an obligation to speak out against other injustices, because this is a really underserved issue. And we don't expect that from all these other activists in the world. We don't expect them to speak up against animal rights. So we shouldn't put that burden onto vegan activists either. So yeah, that's the idea. I'm going to sum up and say, so veganism is a specific movement which is about abolishing the exploitation of non-human animals. It's something concrete. It's not based on abstract principles. It's not based on unknowable speculations. And it's something we can all put into practice. And I think that how I've described veganism here, I think it aligns with what our goal is in an outreach conversation, right? When we're talking to someone in an outreach conversation, we're not trying to get them to agree to abstract principles. We're not going to expect them to read 5 textbooks of like feminist and post-colonial theory, right? What we're trying to get them to do is change their mindset about animals and change their habits. Yeah, that's it. Take a photo if you want to have a look at these resources. Thank you.